First of all, thanks so much, Pat, and everyone for throwing this. This is a great community, and I'm really keen to see it grow. I'm keen to see more of this stuff happening in Sydney and further out. And yeah, just thanks. So yeah, effective UX for hand tracking. So I've been working with the Quest 3 for about 6 months or so. Had the Quest 2 before that. But what really blew me away in particular about the Quest 3 was the hand tracking and just like the seamless kind of development experience in mixed reality. So I wanted to kind of contribute to how we think about hand tracking, as it's a fairly new concept, or at least fairly new to being like a big thing. I know it's been around for a while, but it really is getting popular now. So I think it's important to kind of start to think about how we can design our applications with hand tracking in mind, because it requires a little bit of out of the box thinking. So I'm Luke. I'm a PhD student at UTS. I'm working with VR and physiological computing to try to find better ways of learning in VR, using things like cognitive load theory to optimize learning. And I'm also working with iJack, which is an immersive art company. They do a lot of VR, AR stuff. And I want to give a shout out because I met the founder of iJack at the last meetup, Lucas, and started working with him. So yeah, this is just goes to show you guys are doing something right. Cool. So essentially, I want to just have a look into hand tracking and deconstruct it a little bit and see how it's currently being used. So there'll be a lot of examples of how I think it's done well and what is could still be done a little bit better. And then I want to kind of start to establish a very basic framework of how we can think about designing applications with hand tracking in mind. So as I mentioned, this will be from the perspective of Quest 3 and using Unity, but this applies equally to Unreal and other headsets as well. I know that the Apple Vision Pro has pretty much all the same kind of capabilities I'm talking about here, just be done in a different way. So why do we care about this? I think, like I mentioned, it really blew me away when I first used hand tracking. And I got really excited about it. Just this idea of actually being able to use my physical hands and be free of controllers. And for people that are not really gamers or, haven't used VR a lot, if you design the app correctly, I think that it has the potential to be far more intuitive. So yeah, if it's done right, I think especially for training and things like that, if you can really see your hands, I think that there's such an immediate connection there that can really help people immerse themselves. But like I mentioned, we do have to kind of think about how to replace these controller functionalities because it's not always kind of a one-for-one replication. So I'm actually going to do a little audience participation thing here. So for some context here, I'm working on an app, a mixed reality app called Orb Pondering, which is essentially you're a wizard and you ponder orbs. And the plan was to have a bunch of like gameplay and show it in this presentation, but I got really caught up with other stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it in reverse. I'm going to get some ideas from you guys, and then we're going to kind of discuss, how intuitive that sort of feels. So if you're up for it, to either appear on camera or you can put it in text, you can probably interpret that. That would be great. So first of all, the first move is a summon. So if anyone wants to volunteer, I'd love to hear a way in which someone might summon an orb with their hands. So does anyone have any ideas? Like how would you do that? There's no wrong answers. Okay, yep. I can see Richard. Yep. Richard, can you do that again? Yep. So you kind of like, yep, shaking the hands, getting powerful. Yep. Mary, did you have something as well? Yep. Very cool. All right. I can't see all the cameras. Is there anyone else? Yep. Raising the hand up. I like it. Yeah, cool. So that's awesome. Like Mary, what you did, that was quite similar to the idea that I had. So the one little demo I can show you is putting your hand out like this, and you can see the orb appears as you go flat with your palm, which I found to be quite intuitive. After a while, I also implemented you had to hold your hand closed for a while and sort of charge it up, and then open the hand to actually summon it. So I think something like that. Something else I've seen people do is they put both of their hands together and then they separate them like this, which is another really cool way of doing it. So I think eventually I want to do some kind of A/B testing and see what would be best. Cool. So I don't have examples that I've done for these ones, but this is the second action. So pondering. How would you ponder an orb? So like you're infusing the orb with your powers. Do you have any ideas for that? It's a bit of a tricky one. Yeah, okay. So I can see Mary doing a bit of this as if you got a wine glass in your hand. That's cool. Yeah, I dig it. Anyone else? Oh, Ryan, yeah. Oh, that's cool. Yep. So you're holding it in front of you like this. Yep, I dig that. Cool. Yeah, these are great ideas. One other one that I had is maybe holding it close to your face, because we can sort of use your gaze as well and detect how close something is to your head. So as if you're looking right into the orb and you can kind of see the future or like see its powers or something like that. Cool. And the last one, the unleash. So if we're going to shoot the orb at someone, I won't give any biased indications, but like if we're shooting the orb, how would that look? Yep. Yep. Ryan's got his palm out. Yep. Richard, same thing. Yep. Graham's on it. Oh, yeah. 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 Everyone's loving this one. Cool. 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 So like this. Yep. I like that. Pat was doing with two hands, kind of Dragon Ball Z style. Yep. 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 I love it. Yeah. That's kind of very similar to what I was thinking. So yeah, thanks for the free intellectual property. I will be stealing these ideas and moving on. So essentially, I want to break down how these moves or how these gestures and all these sorts of things are being detected in the SDK. So the primary way that we're looking at these interactions is through poses. So essentially, we have a bunch of joint data in the hand. So there are all these different points. And for each point, you can have the position, rotation, and the velocity. So you can sort of ping the API and you can look at any particular joint and you can see any of those things at any point in time. And the velocity becomes particularly important, especially when you're dealing with movement and stuff like that. So here's an example. We get the thumbs up, thumbs down. There's a peace sign or a bunny and like a paper. So some of those you saw in my little demo as well. And another example, this is an app that comes installed in the Quest 3. It's firsthand. So you can see here, it's telling you to make this hand symbol. So one hand is going to be like a paper hand. The other hand is going to be like a shaka, hang loose. And then the user is going to replicate that. And there we go. They're granted access. Funnily enough, when I first played this game, instead of making that hand signal, I just flipped him off. And he actually got angry and had like a red emoji and shut the door. And I was actually blown away by that. And that was a really, really immersive moment for me because I know that some developer somewhere is like, someone is going to do this. And that person was me. So moving on from poses, we want to add a little bit more movement. We can have these things called gestures. So this is stuff like with UI interactions you'd be used to, swiping, similar to like on a mobile, that kind of thing. So these are really going to get the kind of velocity into play. Also important to keep in mind, it is dependent on the orientation of the hand. So, you can set it to say, if your hand is facing the other way, it's rotated, then it won't activate. Or if it's not going a certain speed, then it won't activate. So you can get quite particular and make your own custom gestures. There's also pointing. So especially for UI stuff, pointing is really great. So here we're pointing at some UI elements and we're sort of pinching to interact with them. This is cool. It's fairly intuitive, but I do find that you lose a little bit of fidelity or a little bit of accuracy when you're trying to select certain things. If anyone's ever done that on the Quest 3, purely with hand tracking, sometimes you have to press things twice, or you move too far down when you don't mean to. So that could probably use a little bit of work. So a really cool example of pointing is this game Finger Gun. So as the title suggests, your fingers become finger guns. So all this person is doing is just using hand tracking. They're just moving their thumbs down towards their hand, and their fingers become guns, which is really cool. I think this is a good example of good hand tracking design, because that's something everyone kind of already knows how to do intuitively. You don't really require too many like crazy tutorials or anything. There's a couple other actions that they got built in there as well. So you can also poke. I find that poking is really, really good for UI interactions, like buttons and things like that. It's probably one of the more kind of responsive feeling interactions that we have in the toolkit. So you can see here when someone's poking something, we've got a poked state, so it's going to turn blue. But then there's also a fully poked state. So when they push it in again, it's going to go green. So that means it's 100% poked. Whereas when it's blue, it's kind of halfway. And we can also switch hands. So here they're going to move over to the other hand and it will remain poked. So it's kind of quite versatile in between the two. So now that we have those in the toolkit, we kind of can start to put together the hands and have these multi-hand interactions, which opens up a lot more possibilities, allows you to get a lot more creative. So here we can see that they've got their palms open flat. And then once this happens, then they can use their other hand to start messing around in the menu. And then the bubbles will come up and they can select the bubbles. And then similarly here, they have their hand kind of on the side. This is kind of like the building mode in this game. And then the other hand is pinching and dragging to select things. So this kind of explains how we can have these different states of like, if you have one orientation, then some actions are enabled, and then another orientation, and they're not. Another cool example is this air guitar game. So they're using both hands here. And you can see by the color coding here which fingers are activated as well. So it's not just the hands, but also each individual finger. So essentially just have an air guitar hero. And I find it interesting, she's also using a real guitar here. It's pretty funny in the video because the real guitar just sounds terrible. She's just like like strumming open strings. But in the game, she's kind of rocking out. So I thought this was pretty cool. I found that like, yeah, in this video, she does lose hand tracking a little bit. And I think it's because there's a physical object here. So sometimes if her fingers go under the neck here, the tracking will be lost. Obviously, the camera needs to be able to see your hands. So that's something to keep in mind if you've got real physical objects you're interacting with. So locomotion is an interesting one. And this is something that has been somewhat of a difficult problem in VR and AR and mixed reality for a while. So here we're going to use teleporting, which is pretty common to VR. Either you teleport to like predetermined spots like this, or just anywhere on a certain surface area. So here they're going to point sort of to the sky, and that will activate the teleport reticle. So they've got it open there. And then once that's open, so we're in that kind of second state, then they can pinch and they can move. So this works okay. I don't really have a better solution, but I do find that it is a little bit janky. I didn't find this too good, especially when you're combining it with this snap turn. So you'll see here in a second, once they get the hang of it, they're going to pinch their fingers to turn. I found it quite difficult to sort of teleport and then pinch in quick succession. You kind of have to like move your hand and then I don't know, I tried it for a while and I couldn't quite get it. So that's another area where we can kind of definitely improve. So if you want to start building stuff, there's never really been a better time. So the Meta SDK has these really, really cool building blocks, which are essentially just predetermined packages that you can bring into your game. And as long as you've got like a Quest connected or some sort of Meta headset, it will just work out of the box. So I did a little speed run and I said, how quickly can I make a hand tracking application? So I'll show you. I just recorded this like 10 minutes ago. So we open the building blocks, boom, camera rig, hand tracking, virtual hands. I'm gonna hit play. And as long as I got my headset connected, Unity will boot up. And boom, hand tracking. So it's super, super easy to start building these things. They do make it a little bit tricky once you want to get like quite specific with like custom poses and stuff like that, but there's plenty of tutorials out there if you want to do that. So when we're thinking about design of controllers and hands, there's a few things to keep in mind. So a lot of the time, which I think is a good idea, apps are supporting both modes of interaction. So by default on the Quest, if you are using controllers and then you put them down, your hands will just be activated straight away. And you can just kind of seamlessly switch between. So as long as you have that in mind in your development sort of pipeline, you account for that, then this is really a good situation to be in. So you can also use one on one hand and one on the other. So you can just use the hand tracking on your left and controller on your right, for example, or vice versa. But yeah, like some things like locomotion, for example, are a bit tricky with hand tracking. So it's not like a one size fits all solution. You can sort of see here. So we're interacting with the controller as per normal. And then as soon as we put them down, the hands come out and we can do our UI interactions with the hands. And then here's an example where you've got one in each. And then the same interactions can be performed with either one. So it's very, very versatile. Another really cool example is this first-person tennis game, which I tried, which I found that you can use with either just controllers or one controller and one hand. And I found that one controller and one hand was really good because I felt like I was really throwing a ball up with my right hand, which was using hand tracking, and then the left hand was using the racket, which makes sense to be holding a controller. You want to have some sort of physical weight to it. So I found that this is a really good kind of hybrid approach. So with the controllers, you do have more like classic gameplay elements, which can be really beneficial in some scenarios. So obviously, like you have a lot of button combos, and there's something physical to hold, like in that tennis example. If you're dealing with gamers or people who are like experienced with consoles, that can actually potentially be a more intuitive experience if they're already used to that. The haptic feedback is really good, especially for like tutorial levels and teaching people stuff, just to give them a small indication that they're doing the right thing. And also a trigger is really handy for UI interactions. Like I mentioned, you can get a little bit more accuracy than with the hands. And for shooting games, I think that's, apart from like the finger gun thing is cool, but I mean, shooting a trigger it's shooting a trigger. So obviously you need to actually have them around and they got to be charged. A big problem as well is people have found it hard to locate which button to press. So they've got the headset on, especially if they're on VR and not sort of AR or mixed reality. They're like, oh, where's the A button? They sometimes have to take their headset off and check. You can have like in-game models as well. This is pretty common, like you have a physical representation in the game, but people will still, especially if it's their first time, they don't get it. Like they get really confused. So locating buttons when you've got a headset on, if you're new to it, can be tricky. They can sometimes lose tracking in poor lighting conditions. But to be fair, this is also the case for hand tracking. If the camera can't see the hands, then that's it. And yeah, like if they break and there's no backup, then you can't really control your application. Whereas, I think it's quite nice to just be traveling around with just a headset and just use your hands if possible. So yeah, like with the hands, when it's done well, it's really intuitive and can be really fun. There's also like a lot of potential if you want to make some really cool like fine-tuned gestures and poses. You have a lot of data to play with. So there's the timing of like how quickly you're activating each joint, like which joints are in tandem together, the orientation. You can get really like specific with it, which is cool if you want to put the time in. Like I said, complete portability, very nice. Not having to carry around controllers and charge them. And I think personally for training applications, unless you're holding like a physical tool that you might want a controller for, hand tracking could be a better experience, just because, intuitively you're seeing your own hands form things, which I think would potentially enhance learning. Obviously, not having physical buttons can be hard, so you kind of have to think around certain things to get the right kind of actions that you want. And like I said, poor lighting, you can lose tracking as well. So overall, I think we should kind of design with this hands first approach. So doing an exercise like we just did before with the wizard stuff, I think is really cool. Like kind of think about how would I intuitively use my hands, and then build the game from that perspective, rather than having controller controls in mind and then trying to kind of reverse engineer. So keeping it simple at first and keeping, stay grounded in reality, at first at least. So it's like grabbing, pointing, actions that like users know how to do, even things like thumbs up and that sort of thing are really good to get users started. And then maybe as they get used to what it's like to track their hands, you can have more abstract movements. So yeah, like controllers still very much a good idea in a lot of scenarios, or using a hybrid approach, especially if you need that physical weight. And yeah, like try actually just doing something with your hands, and use this as part of the design process. Because with the amount of tools and like the kind of variability of everything, you can probably build what you're trying to build if you just imagine it first. Cool. So that's it. Thanks so much. And I'll be around for any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Luke. That was awesome. That was really, really good. Does anybody have questions for Luke? Because now's your time.
Cool. Oh, I missed all these in chat. My bad. Hands together and then copying four hands apart. Yep. Cool. Placing virtual objects and editing the rotation was a bit of a pain. Yeah, it's a little bit tricky. Yeah, like manipulating objects with your hands, like because sometimes there's like the sort of pinch interaction to grab something, but then you might pinch it at the wrong or by the wrong axis or on the wrong point, and then it will rotate around like a different axis than you're intending. You can edit all that stuff, but I think like just going into it, first of all, it might not do what you expect. So it takes a bit of messing around.
I have a brief question, which is on the MetaQuest 3 at the moment, what would you say the percentage of apps at the moment would be that use hand tracking compared to use controllers? Is it still largely controllers?
So most ones that are like kind of actively in development, then I see a lot of posts saying, "Oh, hand tracking update," which is essentially just them converting their controller controls to the hands, which is awesome because I think we should have both available. There's a couple like that finger gun one and the first hand, which is essentially just a demo, which are exclusively hand tracking. But yeah, I think more developers are kind of cluing onto it, because a lot more people are buying the Quest 3 as well, like just for those sorts of capabilities. So it's definitely happening a lot more. But I think, yeah, controllers are still kind of the norm, I'd say. But a lot more developers are catching on. And so I'm keen to see the next wave, which is kind of using hands almost as an assumption, and seeing what other cool stuff we can do with that.
Yeah,
I've got a bit of a question. I was when I used the Apple Vision Pro, it seemed to be pretty much 100% done with kind of like hand tracking, and everything which I used was, very intuitive, really, with hand tracking. Do you think that that's going to be the way, that's going to be the future, really? And over time, controllers will become a little bit obsolete? Or do you think there's always going to be that place for them? Because as I said, the Apple Vision Pro seem to 100% use hand tracking.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think we're probably going to go more that way, as time goes on. But I also think it will remain somewhat contextual. Like I think a lot of the Apple Vision Pro stuff at the moment is geared towards kind of productivity and like office work and that sort of thing. And I reckon using hands for that is awesome because you're probably going to be typing on the keyboard while you're using it as well. And then you're just going to reach up and swipe your virtual screen and all that sort of stuff. So I think having controllers in that scenario is a bit of an impediment. And the Apple Vision Pro has the eye tracking as well. So you can also just select things with your eyes and then confirm with your hand, which is a really nice experience. I think like for more gaming and like VR games specifically, it's still going to be probably a good idea to have controllers at least as a backup. Like I was doing this VR skateboarding game yesterday, and I can't really imagine doing that just with hand tracking, just because there's a lot of button combinations for the different tricks you can do and all that sort of stuff. And I think that doing that in real time, like quite quickly with a hand would be hard, whereas just pressing a button or doing a little flick of the controller is pretty it fits the kind of fast-paced nature of that particular game. So yeah, I think it's contextual, but we're probably I don't know, people seem to really love using their hands, so I think that the development community is going to respond to that, hopefully.
I had a sort of observation on this sort of subject where I had the Unity XR hands package running, and so that sample project. So I've got that running on the Quest 3, and even just sort of wearing it around the house and doing, like say doing the washing up, and you can see it tracking your hands, and you think it's like starts to sort of open up ideas of like, oh yeah, how can this be used? Analyzing human behavior, which I suppose this privacy obviously becomes sort of even more of an issue than it was before, maybe.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's interesting to do the things you normally do, but just do it in VR or in AR. Like I've seen some cool ideas for like cooking applications, for example. Visualizing the recipe in front of you while you're actually making the dish. Stuff like that is really cool. But yeah, it's kind of trippy, right? Just walking around and just seeing a representation of your hands.
Haven't quite got it working on the Apple Vision Pro yet, but yeah, that's what we're trying to do at the moment.
Awesome.
That's cool. And you got a few more questions, Luke, in chat.
Oh,
So I'll let you go through that.
Sure. So Mary says, I wonder if using your whole hand is better physiologically rather than grasping at a controller and maybe getting a trigger finger in time. Can you clarify what you mean by that, Mary?
I mean, I'm just wondering whether like moving around, you're using your fingers, all of that will be better for you health-wise, rather than holding onto something the whole time, and after a while it's all cramping up and you're getting like, RSI in your finger. I'm sure everyone here has gotten that's done any prolonged work on the computer.
100%. Like for me, like I used to get a lot of wrist pain, and I can imagine that if everything I did was hand tracked, that would probably be less of a thing. I mean, you could probably still do a repetitive movement with your hand, but I mean, it's more open and more like you're flexing your muscles probably a little bit more as well. So yeah, that's a really good point.
It reminds me of there was a AR template for a filter where you would select between left and right by moving your head to one side. And I remember being like, this is a terrible idea. It's just gonna like do someone's neck in. So I guess it could help, but it could also be done poorly and then cause issues as well.
Yeah, that's why the design is super important, right? Like we gotta work with the tools we have being our hands, right? Like we gotta make sure it's ergonomic. So how easy would it be then to have props to give you the feeling of a real item, but still getting tracked as hand? For example, with a gun-shaped prop with a trigger. So it kind of sounds a little bit like some of that open source package that Pat was talking about. How easy would it be to have props to give you the feel of the real item? Yeah, that's a good point. So like, I guess you're saying if you're handed a virtual gun, and then you pull it with your hand. Yeah, I mean, I have certainly done things like that in VR and AR. It's pretty good, like especially for simple stuff like throwing a ball or something like that. The more kind of fine motor you get, the harder it might be. I mean, a prop instead of a controller, but the hand is tracked. Oh, I see. So I don't know for sure, but I did see something recently where someone put their Quest controller on top of like a broomstick, and then in the game it was like a wizard staff. And that tracked pretty well, but obviously that's just like tracking the controller, but it's just not in your hand, so it's kind of cheating. And yeah, golf clubs, that tennis game, there's actually like a real racket attachment that you can get where you attach your controller into the racket so you can just really play. So that's really cool. Yeah, it's a similar question to what Kevin has there as well. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that, to be honest, but I'm keen to hear what you guys think if you have any other comments on that. But that's not something I've done a lot of.
Yeah, I think the only thing I can see being difficult with that would be you'd have to be more limited in your hand tracking. So you wouldn't be able to track like so many individual movements, because a lot of the time, say if you're holding like a fake gun, then you won't be able to see visually you pressing the trigger as much at every angle. So you'd still probably need a physical controller that would handle that sort of stuff. But if it was just you're holding, say, a ball, or you're holding something that is more tangible in one big chunk, then it would work. But if it's like assuming that you can really mess with the little item and it knows what you're doing, that'd probably be harder.
I wonder if the object was transparent, like, because then maybe the camera could see through the object, but you can still get the feeling as you holding it, like a transparent gun, for example.
That would be cool, and then you could like add effects to make the gun look more realistic when you put the headset on.
You customize it.
I mean, it's
like
having like an actual object obscure, its vision of said finger. Even when you're doing the XR hands demo, and it can sort of like you can see, how much a finger is curled, right? And even sometimes fingers can obscure other fingers, and you don't quite get the sort of the full sort of value until you've moved your hand slightly, right? So yeah, having actual real objects in your hand, I don't know how that would track, unless it can just track your wrist, maybe, like a more central point rather than the whole
yeah,
hand.
I mean, we kind of saw an example in that air guitar thing, like I was mentioning, like sometimes she would hide her fingers beneath the actual guitar she was holding, and then the tracking would be lost, which kind of makes sense if you can't see the fingers. But on the wrist thing, I know recently they've had like full body tracking, which is kind of like, I think they just use machine learning based on where your hands are and where your head is, and then how high or low you are, and then it kind of like creates your avatar. So if you're moving a little bit, then your avatar's virtual legs will walk, kind of thing. So you could probably do a similar thing, make it like a best guess as to where your finger is if it's obscured. I could see that being a possibility. Cool. Yeah, that's about all I have to say.
Cool.
But yeah, thanks, Ace.
Awesome. Thank you, Luke. Much appreciated. That was very cool. Very thought-provoking, and actually kind of cool just to see like a whole lot of different ways of doing hand tracking.